This is DR.RED Panda.
What is a Japanese Oiran? How is an Oiran different from a geisha? Hello everyone, I'm DR.RED Panda. Today, let's explore the fascinating culture of Japan's Oiran. The origins of Oiran culture. The concept of the Oiran dates back to Japan's Edo period, a time of relative peace and prosperity under the country's feudal system. The term Oiran comes from the characters for flower, Hana, and leader, or best, Kai. Together, the name signifies a woman who is both beautiful and exceptional. Oiran originally emerged among the wealthy samurai class and were considered the aristocracy of the traditional entertainment world. Their primary role was to provide entertainment and social companionship, which included dancing, music, games, and engaging in conversation with guests. Oiran were known for their extravagant appearance, wearing elaborate hairstyles, luxurious kimonos, and heavy jewelry. Their behavior and etiquette were meticulously cultivated through rigorous training. The making of an Oiran. Becoming an Oiran in Japan wasn't open to just anyone. It depended heavily on one's origins. Many were daughters of fallen aristocrats who entered the pleasure quarters due to economic hardship, or were kidnapped and sold by traffickers who targeted noble lineages. The belief was that these girls already carried a natural air of nobility in their blood, making them more likely to succeed as high-class courtesans. From a young age, girls with striking beauty were selected and raised by okiya, brothel owners, to become Oiran. Under careful guidance, they learned tea ceremony, flower arrangement, traditional musical instruments, classical literature, and refined manners, all designed to cultivate both their charm and intellect. Only when they had mastered both artistic skill and the poise of a noblewoman could they be considered a true Oiran. It's worth noting that their diet was also strictly controlled throughout their upbringing to maintain a slender, fragile-looking physique. The entire training process could take decades, involving a massive investment in time and resources. Once they completed their training, they would begin receiving clients. However, unlike ordinary prostitutes who had to remain within the brothel all their lives, sitting by the window, waiting for clients to choose them, and often dying in obscurity from venereal disease, Oiran enjoyed a different fate. They chose their clients themselves, often through a grand ceremonial parade known as Ourand Dochu. The strict regulation of the Oiran system. In Japan's red light districts, a designated area called the Yukaku strictly confined the movements of courtesans. Within this tightly controlled system, Oiran stood as the elite among them, enjoying prestige and recognition, but their freedom was severely restricted. From the moment they entered the profession, they were no longer allowed to leave the Yukaku freely. The management system of the Yukaku, licensed pleasure quarters, was meticulously detailed, with every move of an Oiran, courtesan of the highest rank, strictly monitored. Their clothing, food, housing, and daily routines were all arranged by the establishment to ensure they maintained the high costs and social status associated with their position. Through the implementation of stringent rules and codes of conduct, the Yukaku exerted control over the Oiran's private lives, including their romantic relationships and social interactions. This rigid management not only safeguarded the brothel's financial interests, but also reinforced its dominance over the Oiran. For instance, whenever an Oiran wanted to leave the premises, she was required to report it in advance and be accompanied by attendants. Even when attending important festivals or celebrations, prior permission was mandatory. These restrictions meant that although Oiran stood at the top of society's hierarchy, they were like birds in gilded cages, enjoying only a facade of freedom. However, the greatest tragedy of such a system was that even when Oiran attained fame and fortune, true liberation often eluded them. Many were unable to escape the grasp of the Yukaku, remaining bound by it even after retirement. While the system upheld order within the brothels, it did so at the cost of the Oiran's personal happiness and freedom. Yet ironically, it was this rigorous discipline that gave Oiran their unique charm. They were not just embodiments of beauty, but also paragons of talent and intellect. In an era where men were considered superior, Oiran were among the few women who could converse as equals with men. Their learning and insight frequently left even the most self-assured male scholars dumbfounded. The influence of the Oiran even transcended national borders. Legend has it that a Japanese Oiran once entertained a member of the British royal family. Her beauty and intelligence reportedly stirred jealousy in the Queen of England. While this tale may sound like a modern urban legend, it vividly illustrates the high regard and social impact Oiran held in their time. Behind their glamorous facade, however, lay untold hardship. Despite their acclaim, Oiran were under immense pressure and constraints. Imagine being stripped of a normal life from a young age, constantly under the scrutiny of countless judgmental eyes. One could argue it's more nerve-wracking than walking on eggshells. The renowned Oiran Dochu parade. Upon becoming an Oiran, she would participate in a grand street procession known as the Oiran Dochu, a spectacle designed to draw public attention. Dressed elaborately in garments weighing around 20 kilograms and wearing wooden clogs, okobo, as high as 5 to 6 inches, the Oiran would parade from a gallery corridor to a tea house called Yanagia, flanked by male bodyguards and attendants, creating a striking and extravagant scene. Walking in those towering clogs was far from easy, and so Oiran had their own unique way of walking, primarily categorized into inner figure-8 and outer figure-8 styles. It took 2 to 3 years of dedicated practice to achieve the graceful motion known as the goldfish tail sway. However, the walking speed was incredibly slow, so much so that an old Japanese saying goes, "The Oiran walks slower than a cow." Despite how impractical the clogs were, courtesans eagerly wore them, as their height symbolized the elevated status of an Oiran, distinguishing them from lower-ranked prostitutes and asserting their superiority. At the very front of the parade, a lantern bearing the Oiran's name would be held high. Following behind were attendants escorting the slowly walking Oiran. At the rear were a few aspiring Oiran candidates, gaining public exposure with bodyguards in tow. The streets were packed with onlookers, curious spectators, and wealthy clients hoping to catch a glimpse or spend a fortune for a chance at her company. Naturally, all the associated costs, attendance, banquets, entertainers were covered by the client. Without deep pockets, one could hardly dream of hosting an Oiran. Today, the Oiran Dochu you see in Japanese tourist spots has evolved into a cultural showcase for festivals, entirely detached from its original purpose of client entertainment. A glimpse worth a fortune. As mentioned earlier, the destination of the Oiran Dochu was the Yanagia, a high-end social club. Here, patrons were expected to display their wealth by purchasing tea, alcohol, or even hosting lavish banquets for large groups of courtesans. This extravagant spending served as a testament to their financial power. Once the Oiran arrived at the Yanagia, any guest wishing to see her had to flaunt their wealth through such expenditures, essentially paying an entrance fee just for the chance to lay eyes on her. All the while, the Okami, madam, would observe quietly, assessing each guest's financial means and charm, ultimately selecting the most impressive suitor to be presented to the Oiran. However, this initial meeting was strictly ceremonial. It was merely a face-to-face encounter. No conversation was allowed. In some cases, the guest might only get a fleeting glance of the Oiran before she turned and walked away without a word. Those hoping for a deeper connection had to return to the Yanagia and spend even more extravagantly to demonstrate their sincerity and capability. Many wealthy sons of noble families spent lavishly for a second meeting, though even then, a conversation was not guaranteed. And if it did occur, it was brief and closely scrutinized by the Oiran. During this short exchange, she would evaluate the guest's responses and demeanor. If she was unimpressed, she had the right to reject him outright. However, if she was pleased with his conduct and character, then on the guest's third visit, he could finally be accepted as an Iraimaku no bin. A guest granted the honor of spending the night with her. An Iraimaku no bin, literally guest beneath the curtain, referred to someone who could share the night with the Oiran. Importantly, a guest could only enter into such a relationship with one Oiran at a time and was not allowed to visit the chambers of other courtesans afterward. The Oiran, however, was not bound by such exclusivity and could entertain multiple patrons simultaneously. If a guest wished to end his association with a particular Oiran and seek a new one, he would have to pay a hefty sum to sever the tie, a sort of exit fee, before starting the process anew with another. Despite appearances suggesting countless wealthy men were willing to spend fortunes for a Oiran, very little of that money ended up in the Oiran's own pocket. The cost of training and maintaining an Oiran was astronomical, and her daily expenses equally high. As a result, Okami treated their Oiran like cash cows, tightly controlling their earnings. Most of the profits went straight to the brothel management, leaving the Oiran with only a tiny fraction of what she helped generate. The retired Oirans. Although Oiran held great power and status, seemingly enjoying a life of privilege, their careers were painfully short. By the age of 28, they were required to retire. Such is the nature of the pleasure industry, where beauty and youth are the highest commodities. After 28, women were considered to have lost their allure and were no longer seen as attractive to patrons. Typically, becoming an Oiran required significant experience. It wasn't a title earned immediately upon reaching adulthood. Most women were promoted to Oiran status around the age of 20, and those who achieved this at exactly 20 were considered exceptionally gifted. However, the majority only reached this rank at 22 or 23, giving them just 5 or 6 years before retirement. Though these few years were lived in grandeur, the constant exploitation by the Okami, madam, and brothel meant little money could be saved. Without securing a future before retirement, most former Oiran lost their privileged status and were demoted to common prostitutes, continuing to sell their bodies to buy back their freedom, often leading a life of hardship and poverty. That said, many Oirans sought a path out before retirement, either by becoming a concubine to a wealthy man, thereby maintaining a comfortable lifestyle, or by marrying into a regular household and settling down as a wife. In reality, however, whether in Japan or other country, women from the pleasure quarters rarely had happy endings. In the Japanese film A Courtesan with Flowered Skin, an Oiran expresses her bleak outlook. Whether I look ahead or glance behind, there is nothing, absolutely nothing. Draped in splendor, they lived between discipline and transaction, creations of their time, yet ultimately its sacrifices. The elegance and artistry that drew admiration were honed through countless acts of compromise and endurance. And so the question arises, when beauty is defined by systems and priced by the market, how do we understand dignity and worth? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. We're not just reflecting on a piece of history, we're confronting ourselves. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm DR.RED Panda. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.